So the story that I'm going to tell is going to begin with the experiences of the summer, so the traumatic separation of families at the US-Mexico border and the mismanaged reunification that followed, which is still kind of an ongoing nightmare for some families that are yet to be reunified, as well as difficult for families who are still in the extended process of reconnecting after having had extended periods apart. I want to recognize that there are probably people in the room who have personal experience with these issues, and that. So I'm going to be telling kind of this is going to be a two-part talk today. So I'm going to start with presenting some highlights from some of the research that I do and kind of orienting you to some of the research that I do that focuses on separations and reunions of parents and their young children, and talking about how I see that as relevant to the experiences of families separated at the border. And then move from there into thinking about, into talking about ways that I've sought to use my research and use the expertise that I have as a scholar to support organizations working with migrant children and families. And it's really a story about kind of partnerships and connecting and working with organizations around the country who have been addressing these issues for a very long time. So I want to start by saying that I'm not an immigration scholar, and so I've been on a steep learning curve. So part of what you'll hear from me is about how I've kind of been working to bring myself up to speed and to kind of learn from and work with organizations who have deeper and long historical understanding of these issues. And I'm grateful for the support that I've received for my learning, but also want to kind of share with you just how incredibly open people have been to partnering, and just some of the ways in which, once I started taking one step at a time, kind of how things have snowballed, and how there's just a lot of opportunity for all of us to be using our research skills to have an impact and to be partnering with organizations that are often very receptive and appreciative of that kind of outreach. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. And they've been really pleased to feel like I have something to contribute and something to offer, since, like many of you, I'm sure, found the news over the summer really devastating, and spent a lot of time feeling like I need to do something, and had found it really challenging and exciting, and it's just been kind of an unfolding process to figure out what I can do and how I use the skills and the training that I have to be effective. So that's where we're going to go. So starting first with research highlights and relevance to families separated at the border. And as I start that, I want to particularly acknowledge my collaborator, Dr. Kate Rosenblum at University of Michigan. So much of the research that I've been doing over the last few years has focused on the experiences of military families with deployment, so specifically military families with infants and toddlers and preschool-age children, so very young children, and learning from those families about what it's like to prepare for separation, to live through and kind of endure extended periods of separation, and then to come together again after a period of separation. And that work has largely been collaborative with Kate, who is a professor of psychiatry and obstetrics and gynecology and co-director of the Women and Infants Mental Health Program at University of Michigan. So I want to acknowledge her role in this work. So by way of background, I just want to highlight a few things about what we know from literature and from the developmental science about disruptions of early parent-child relationships and repairs of parent-child relationships. So separation from a parent can be experienced as a significant disruption, and that's particularly so for infants and very young children. And there is a large body of research on disruption and repair processes that comes out of basic developmental science. And we know that the process of reunion involves mixed emotions, and that the return to baseline takes time and support. And that includes both the smaller kind of day-to-day disruptions, so having a separation, a child who struggles with saying goodbye at daycare, might take some time reconnecting at the end of the day. A child who is participating in psychology research might go through an experience like the strange situation procedure, and there's some effort that goes into kind of reconnecting. But then we also know that where there are larger impacts, larger disruptions, like foster care, like parental incarceration, like adoption, like military families, then in the case of larger disruptions like this, they can significantly impact child and parent well-being. And another piece of context for this is that often there are misconceptions about the impact on very young children of separation. So, for example, when I work with military families, I'll often hear from parents who say, well, at first I thought I was really lucky to be deploying now because my child is so young they won't remember it, and kind of came to realize that, in fact, although their child wasn't able to talk about what the experience meant to them in the way that an older child would be able to do, that the impact was pretty significant and was felt for a very long time. And so I'll get into telling you a little bit about how that process is experienced. And so I'm going to present some highlights that come from a series of papers, a series of studies that all involve qualitative research with service members, veterans, and their spouses who are parents of young children and have experienced deployment either as a parent away from home during deployment or a parent at home caring for children who are experiencing separation from their other parent. And so over a period of some years, we've interviewed more than 100 service members, veterans, and their spouses. And so what I'm presenting today is findings from that research. So with respect to the deployment cycle, there are 3 key phases. So pre-deployment, when families are preparing to be apart, deployment when they're coping and trying to sustain relationships, and reintegration, which is the period of reconnecting and repairing relationships. So the pre-deployment period starts even before getting orders to deploy. So for service members who are parents, they're very aware of the possibility that they might deploy. And so that's both a source of worry and an opportunity to plan ahead. And so service member parents put a lot of time into and are even expected by the military to have formal plans in place, thinking about who will provide care for their children and all the levels of backup that they would need where they'd be away from home. And so then upon receiving orders, service members and their spouses or partners, if they are partnered, move into focusing on specific preparations. And the preparations can be both practical and emotional. So it can be include things like getting affairs in order, making arrangements for child care, figuring out who's going to fill in all the responsibilities that the deploying parent usually takes care of for the household. And then there are also emotional preparations. So thinking about how to make the most of the time before deployment, preparing children, creating memories that will be sustaining, thinking about how you can allay child worries and kind of offer reassurance about what's going to come. So pretty intense preparations often for as long a period of time as families know they have up until deployment. They're really focused on preparing. And so in the words of one deploying mother of 2 young children who I interviewed, she said, everything about it was challenging because I was a mom, right? With me being gone, how would they manage? So we started, she was responding to a question about what was challenging, and she talked at great length. It was almost hard to pinpoint anything because everything about it was so overwhelming. And in her household, she really carried the bulk of the responsibilities for child care, for managing her children's days from the smallest details up to the kind of biggest social and emotional problems that the children might be struggling with. And she just couldn't imagine how that would be covered or who would fill those gaps when she was gone. So then deployment is a period of time that has a number of impacts on parents and children. And so in our interviews, parents describe a range of impacts on the children and then on themselves. And so for young children, parents talk about the difficulty that children have kind of understanding and making sense of their parents' absence. So with older children, you can kind of be clearer about timelines and they might have a sense of what that means. But with young children, it's really hard to understand what's happening and why this separation is happening and how long it's going to last. Young children have difficulty often with adjusting to new care arrangements. They might be struggling with fear for their missing parent's safety, become more clingy to the at-home parent, and they might demonstrate that stress in a variety of ways. So sometimes it's withdrawing and regressing, sometimes it's increasing aggression. And at the same time that the children are having these struggles, parents talk about a number of impacts on themselves. So both deployed and at-home parents experience a number of stressors. And so for the parent at home, it includes worry about the safety of their deployed partner. For the parent who's away, it includes worrying about how their partner at home is coping, and both parents worry about how children will cope with their grief and fear. So in the words of one deployed mother, I was pretty much in a total panic for the entire time. The planning I did sounds fantastic, except that you just can't prepare for everything. And so in the context of military families experiencing extended separations due to deployment, they've had the opportunity to prepare that we talked about, and they also often get support. So parents talk about and appreciate efforts by the military to support sustained connections. So things like providing the technology so that parents can have video calls home and see their children, facilitating recording of bedtime stories to share with children at home, and also extensive supports for the parent at home through family readiness groups. So reintegration post-deployment is also a period that can be challenging. So often when we think about these moments of reunion, we picture the kind of YouTube moments, the things you see on TV where a child is like surprised at a sports event and goes running up to the parent, and you see like the joy and the hug and the tears. And those moments are profoundly moving, but they are only a part of the story. So parents talk to us at great length about reintegration as a process and not a moment, and talk about some of the ups and downs of that process and describe it as a period that is very extended. Often parents struggle with children feeling angry or feel fearful that their parent will leave again. So even small separations can be really difficult for a child to tolerate. Parents will talk about coming home and just how difficult it is even to leave the room, let alone to drop off at school or daycare, because the children are really struggling with feeling secure about their parent being home and staying home. Parents talk about intensive efforts that are needed over an extended period of time to reconnect and to rebuild trust and security. And that process of reconnecting is even harder when family members are experiencing trauma or other mental health symptoms. So one father with PTSD described his response this way to hearing his toddler cry. He said, "At times I just feel like going outside just so I don't have to hear it, because it just sometimes gets to be too hard to bear. All that stuff plays back into my PTSD." And he talked actually in kind of vivid detail about the kinds of images that he would see and the things that would get evoked for him when he heard the child cry. So the child crying was distressing not only because he was worried about his child's needs, but he was also kind of having flashbacks to things that he had seen during his deployed time. So knowing that deployment is a time of great stress for family, often people think about reunification as being the part where now, things are going to kind of come together in this wonderful way. And indeed, it's a time, often of a lot of celebration and joy, but it also is a pretty complicated time. And so the need for a strong community extends after the service member returns. And the need is particularly pronounced when the service member is a parent to a very young child. So one of the core challenges for parents of young children is reconnecting with a child who has changed significantly during their period of time away. So if a parent deploys for months to a year, you might leave behind an infant and come home to a toddler, or a toddler and come home to a preschooler. And so there's a period of adjustment, understanding kind of how the child has grown and changed and what they need from you now as a parent. Often it's a really difficult experience for parents with very young children that the child no longer remembers them, and the kind of close relationship that they shared has to really be rebuilt very gradually. So it can be a complicated time. And one of the things that we know about how healing and repair occur is that it occurs within day-to-day moments when family members respond to each other's needs for support, for nurture, for connection. It occurs when a parent responds to a child's crying, when a parent picks up the child and offers comfort. It occurs when they are playing ball together. It occurs helping with homework. But kind of all of these daily kind of interactive repairs are part of the process of reconnecting and healing. We also know that there are supports that we can offer to families, and Kate directs a program called Strong Military Families, and I'm now working on an adaptation of that intervention specifically for mothers who serve and deploy. And Strong Military Families has an approach that's oriented around 5 core pillars. So psychoeducation regarding effective parenting strategies, self-care skills to address parents' own stress and psychiatric symptoms, enhanced social support through connection with other families, connection to community resources, and support for child and parent interactions. And so these are some examples of the kinds of support that can be meaningful for families in the process of reconnecting. And so as things were unfolding this summer, I was at first feeling, I think I was responding as a human being, as a parent, the way I'm sure kind of many of us were, just feeling kind of overwhelmed and horrified, and having difficulty tolerating the news, and also being ashamed that I could even struggle to tolerate the news when some people have to kind of live what I'm hearing talked about. Was really struggling with that. And I didn't at first necessarily see a direct connection between kind of my own expertise and the work that I do and things that were happening, since I don't study immigration, and this context is not, is something that I know relatively little about compared to others who work in this area as practitioners, as advocates, or as researchers. But as I kind of reflected on the things that I was hearing, I realized this actually kind of relates to some of the themes of my work. I study relationship disruptions and repair. I study experiences of families with separating and reconnecting. And part of what was happening this summer was families were being separated. And and initially there was hope but uncertainty about if they would reconnect. And then eventually some families, not all, but many families had the opportunities to reconnect. And I thought, maybe I have something to offer here, and maybe there's something that I can contribute from the work that I've done. And it's less that I saw a comparison between the experiences of military families and families separated at the border, and more so that I saw a pretty profound contrast. So I thought, In the case of military families, there is so much thoughtfulness that goes into preparing, and there is so much commitment to supporting families with the experiences of separation and reconnecting. And that seemed like such a stark contrast to these abrupt, harsh, and forcible separations, and the relative thoughtlessness that went into how families were brought back together. And some of that kind of played out, through national media, so I'm sure you can kind of picture some of that as I'm talking about it. And I thought maybe there's something powerful in kind of highlighting this contrast that I can draw on what I know from my work with military families to offer some implications for families separated at the border, and to say, that there is a big danger in treating separations of parents and young children casually. That when separations occur, preparation and support for maintaining connection and for coping is likely to be helpful. So, that was one of the things that was missing, and that we know that matters. To point out that while we know that reunions are powerful and a relief, that we also know that the implications of separation are great, and that the process of reuniting is complex and is not quick or easy. And also that trauma-informed treatment is something that matters and is likely to be helpful and really is warranted in situations where the separation has been traumatic, and that efforts to facilitate and promote interactive repair could be of benefit to families. And so these are some of the things that I was thinking about, and had the idea initially. My first thought and kind of the first action step I took with this was to draft an op-ed and to invite Kate to work with me on that, and to put that out into the world. And so we wrote an op-ed for The Hill. Military families can teach us about the cost of family separations. And so kind of the key takeaway of that was that parent-child separations and reunions are profoundly challenging, even with time to prepare and support. And so that the separations occurring at the border must be that much harder, and that we know that they're absolutely destructive and damaging to families. And as developmentalists, we had deep concern about that and wanted to kind of bring our research into articulating why we saw that as problematic. And so we wrote this op-ed drawing on our research with military families, and the goal of this, in part, was to reach a different audience. So we thought maybe there is a way in which writing this article and connecting it to the experiences of military families might resonate with somebody who was not already having the same response and didn't necessarily agree with us off the bat about policy at the border. That maybe somebody who was thinking about military families and read this op-ed might see some resonance, might find something that connected, and that this angle might reach some people. And so we had the opportunity to publish the op-ed in The Hill. It was shared about 1,300 times directly from The Hill, and then also we're grateful to friends and organizations who kind of helped us spread it. And so it was an opportunity to reach a broad audience, and I think a pretty politically diverse audience. So to speak, beyond kind of the circles that we might move in as individuals, but to kind of reach a wide group of people. It was published June 18th, and I wanted to share, I avoided reading a lot of the comments online, because that usually is kind of a black hole that is not helpful. But I did get a few messages directed to me personally and sent to me by email from folks who'd read it. And I wanted to share an example of the kind of comment I received that was really meaningful and made me feel really very glad that I had taken the time to do this. And so here's one. My father was on a submarine during a period of my early childhood. This resonated with me. To be honest, I'm not sure we ever really reconnected again. Definitely a really stressful period in our family life, and that was with all the planning and benefits that the Navy offered our family. Totally different story at the border. I can see it a little bit differently now. And kind of went on, but I'll leave it at that. And that was kind of my hope in writing this. So to receive even one message, and we received several along those lines, kind of meant a lot to us. I also want to add, as kind of an aside, in case anyone is thinking about writing op-eds, that this was also a bit of a learning curve and a journey for me to do this. So it's a different style of writing. I first drafted this, and it had all of the same substantive content, but it was written very differently. The sentences were pretty complex and not, it was not op-ed style, right? And so it took quite a lot of it took a number of rounds of revision to kind of break it up and make sentences kind of shorter and more powerful and declarative. And it was really useful to turn it over to friends and colleagues and say, does anyone have some advice about this? And call me out if you see me being too kind of academic in my language, and if it sounds in places like it belongs in a in a journal and not in a in like popular press. And so that was really useful, and I'm grateful for that support, and that was kind of a learning curve. But so then that was kind of the first step, and then that led to a number of things afterward. And so I'm going to kind of move now to talking about kind of what came next after starting with this first step of writing an op-ed. And so a brief thank you to colleagues in the research that I do with military families and some of the folks who have funded and supported that work. So now I'm going to talk about using research to support organizations working with migrant children and families. So after I wrote the op-ed with Kate and was working to kind of put it out in various places, hoping that it would reach more people if we could get some visibility for it, that led to a number of kind of conversations and connections. And so in particular, I ended up connecting with 3 colleagues around the country who I know and I'm connected to through a fellowship program that we all had participated in as graduate students. I wasn't in the same year of the program as any of them, didn't know all of them very well kind of previously to the work that we've been doing this summer. But I had posted this op-ed in a group that we're all part of. They responded with sharing some of the things that they were thinking about and working on or wanting to work on, and we started this kind of exchange thinking about how can we be using our research skills. We're all folks who have different emphases but focus on child development, child welfare, child well-being. Megan, so only one of the 3 of us really is steeped in the world of immigration. So she directs the Center on Immigration and Child Welfare at New Mexico State University, and so she has a deep knowledge, strong connections to organizations around the country doing work in this area, and just has been kind of invaluable in our collaborative work, given the extensive experience that she brings. But so the 3 of us, Emily Bosquet-Ruckers, Abby Ross at Fordham, and Megan Fino-Velasquez, kind of came together. And the first thing we thought about was kind of what's being done and how can we do something that's not duplicative but would be meaningful. And so we knew there were a lot of kind of letters circulating, and we were seeing a lot of things. This is when the family separation policy was still the zero tolerance policy that was a de facto family separation policy was in effect. And we saw one gap. We're all social workers, and we thought, well, maybe we could write a letter that comes from social workers and speak specifically to our code of ethics and ways in which social workers need to stand against the practice of separating families at the border. And so our first step as a group of 3, just kind of informally launching this, not as any kind of group other than a group of colleagues who came together, was to write an open letter from concerned social workers. And so we wrote this pretty quickly. We posted it online, encouraging people to sign and to share. It was up for about 2 days, not even 2 full work days, and collected over 2,600 signatures, which was kind of shocking and exciting to us, and suggested that we were not the only ones who were feeling, really urgent about kind of doing something and having our voices heard. And the letter, I should say, expressed opposition to family detention practices as well as family separation, so concerns about that as well. Many who signed on to the letter, given kind of who our networks are experts in child and family well-being, health and mental health, and feel like we're bringing kind of our research into our decision-making here, and kind of our informed opinions were that these practices are harmful to children and families. And so it started there, and then kind of as a next step, we thought, okay, well, we had this huge response. We sent out an email to all of our signers of the letter after we had finished collecting the signatures, and after we had delivered this letter to members of the administration, so to the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, to the White House and the President, as well as to congressional leadership. I should also mention that we built a network around the country in doing this letter. So we had people, just as it turned out, not through kind of any deliberate planning, signers from every state. And we had the thought that we could reach out to somebody in every state and ask them to send it to their congressional delegation. So we did that and got kind of enthusiastic responses from people around the state, around the country, who were glad to kind of be ambassadors and deliver this letter on behalf of social workers around the country to their representatives and senators. So the letter got out. We then sent out an email kind of thanking everyone who had signed, letting them know the steps we had taken and where the letter had been delivered, and asking them to indicate if they would like to have continued contact and hear about other opportunities to take action. And we had an overwhelming response to that from people saying yes, they would like to know about other opportunities. So we started thinking about what we could do next. And one of Megan's colleagues, a woman named Emily Butera, who's at the Women's Refugee Commission, we decided to have a conversation with her and try and learn what she thought would be most useful for a group of academics or a group of social workers. And we being social work academics also wanted to bring in more of our academic community from across disciplines. So we had this conversation with Emily where we asked, like, what do you think we could do that would be kind of most useful and supportive of the work that organizations like yours are involved in and have been for a very long time? And so she suggested that we do a briefing where she would provide some up-to-date information for people on rapidly shifting policies and practices at the border, talk to people about where advocacy efforts should be focused now, and she highlighted some examples of ways in which people might think they are, might be intending to be helpful, but might be kind of misdirecting advocacy efforts in ways that kind of confuse the message or are not kind of reaching the right people who are in positions to affect change. And also thought that it would be really useful for us to facilitate a conversation around how we can use our collective power to make an impact. And so we kind of put the word out through social media, through professional groups that we're part of, and we organized this phone briefing for academics and scholars across disciplines. So only that letter was the kind of one action that we took that was limited to social work, and the rest of what we've gone on to do has been broadly inclusive. But asking, inviting people to be part of this briefing and to hear these things. And so 150 people responded and joined this call. Most of the 150 were on the call. A small number of those were folks who asked for to receive notes, weren't able to participate, but wanted notes and wanted to stay connected. And again, we were pretty overwhelmed. So, pleased and also just wowed that this many people, spent the time on a call hearing from Emily Butera and wanted to think about how we could kind of all work together. And so coming out of that, we thought, okay, now what can we do next? We've started something, maybe not even entirely intentionally, but we have connected with a lot of people who all want to be doing something. We have among us a really diverse set of kind of skills, a lot of research training, a lot of different areas of substantive expertise, and how can we kind of harness this and what can we be doing? So we started a group that we call Scholars Taking Action for Families, or STAFF is our acronym. We've been operating as a working group of the center that Megan directs, which is the Center on Immigration and Child Welfare. And we, I'll just read this to you so you have a sense of what we do, but the group was established in June 2018 in response to US immigration practices and policies to forcibly separate children and parents at the border, hold families in immigration detention, and remove asylum protections for victims of domestic violence and gang violence. This working group of the Center for Immigration and Child Welfare brings together scholars from across disciplines and around the country to work together in partnership with immigration advocates to apply our research skills and substantive expertise to inform advocacy efforts and promote the well-being of asylum-seeking children, parents, and families. And then we name the founders and say, in an area where the on-the-ground needs and information changes almost daily, staff is working to generate and translate social science knowledge that's relevant to the specific issues on the ground and to facilitate effective rapid response advocacy efforts. Staff activities include preparation of research briefs, regular updates for academics on policy as it unfolds, and advocacy efforts by partner organizations, and tips and templates for academics doing advocacy work. Staff has formed multiple small work groups to focus on specific issues, including family separation, family detention, and domestic violence and asylum. Across these areas, staff activities aim to advance effective research translation for policymakers and train researchers on effective policy advocacy. So that was a mouthful, and now I'm going to just offer some highlights of the work that we've been doing. So we had this list that started at about 150 academics. We have been adding people steadily, and it's now about doubled in size. We have formed a number of small working groups. So one of the first things that we did after kind of assembling this group was, and after this phone briefing, was to send out an email and say, thank everyone for their participation, share notes and resources, and say that we were interested as a first step in putting together some small groups to work on research briefs, and invited people to let us know if they were interested to join in that effort. And we had in mind a series of topics that were very specifically relevant to the issues that were unfolding. And we got some great response and developed 3 teams initially to work on research briefs in particular areas, and I will tell you a bit about that. We've also kind of identified a number of people among our group who have specific skills to offer, like a number of people who are writing instructors and offered to do kind of coaching or support for any academics wanting to attempt an op-ed or a letter to the editor who might not have experience with that type of writing. And we've done some kind of matchmaking there and have offered support to people who have placed op-eds and letters to the editor in their local papers. And we've also kind of been providing along the way here and there kind of updates as we receive them from partner organizations about efforts that we can support. So the first kind of products to come out of the staff group are research briefs prepared by 2 of our working groups. And so I will show you the titles and the teams that have put these 2 together and then describe the process a little bit. So one is entitled How Do Immigrant Children and Families Experience Immigrant Detention? A group of co-authors including Alejandra Rose Pilars, who is here at UW-Madison in the School of Social Work, and another on the impacts of parental incarceration on children and families, and the lead author of that brief is here in the room today, Julie Fehlman-Tynan, along with collaborators from around the country. And so for each of the groups that we put together on to work on research briefs, we had some people with real kind of expertise in the area that they were writing on, and some people who were moving into new terrain and kind of offering their research skills to support a lead author who really was steeped in this area and to help with lit review or kind of in other ways. And so we pulled together these groups, offered some guidance, figured out, drew on kind of Megan's expertise in the policy world to offer some kind of parameters for what these briefs should look like. And we worked with our partner organizations, a number of advocacy groups around the country, to get some guidance on what they felt would be most useful to them in their work. So what do they already know that doesn't need to be covered? What would be kind of helpful new knowledge? What is the level of detail that would be useful to them when they are engaging in policy advocacy, or in some cases in case advocacy for folks who represent clients and work as attorneys representing people in immigration court. And we got input from them, offered some guidance to our groups, went through several rounds of revision with each group, and what we did there was have not only other academics review the briefs, but we sent drafts of all the briefs to groups like the Women's Refugee Commission, like Tahiri Justice Center, groups with large national presence, long and respected history of kind of working in this area, and a lot of insight to offer, and got feedback on not only kind of the writing, but also what's missing, what would kind of enhance these briefs to really make them useful and relevant for people who are kind of doing the work every day and representing immigrant children and families. And so we got feedback, went through some iterations, and have published those, and they've now been distributed through those partner networks too. So Tahiri Justice Center, for example, which has attorneys working around the country, provides legal and social services around the country to women and girls who are refugees. It has put our briefs in the hands of kind of everyone who works for them, and we've gotten some great feedback about kind of what it's meant to have these resources and how they are able to use them in constructing their cases when they're representing clients, or in making their cases to funders when they're talking about the kind of social services that are needed. And so we've had kind of a good reach with these. Another group that I want to highlight is that we have a working group on intimate partner violence and asylum that has come together, led by a faculty member at Arizona State and a faculty member at University of Michigan. And this one I think is just kind of a nice case example of kind of where I hope we'll go, and some things that have just been going really well. So it's a group that includes 12 people, 2 co-leaders who are pretty senior and highly regarded in their area. Both are researchers on intimate violence prevention and intimate partner violence prevention. And you may know that one of the changes in immigration policy that's come down recently is the direction of Attorney General Sessions that both domestic violence and gang violence should no longer kind of have the same, it should no longer be considered as grounds for asylum. And so this group is working to kind of make the evidence-based case that, in fact, intimate partner violence is a matter of, it has to do with social conditions, and it is in social norms, and it is not only kind of a personal, private matter that happens in an individual's home, but it has to do with a public context where there is sanctioning or kind of impunity for people who are violent towards a partner. It has to do with patriarchy. And this is a group that has so much expertise in this area, including several members of this group who are very fluent in the issues in the context of the Northern Triangle, so people who do work in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And so this group kind of came together. It was suggested by a faculty member at University of Michigan, and we said, that sounds great, but do you want to like lead it and get it started? Because we are excited about all these things, but our bandwidth is basically what do we have volunteers willing to do? And so this group has come together, and they've had, they've reached out and have had conversations with people around the country who provide services and advocate and work with people who have fled gender-based violence in their countries of origin. And they spent a lot of time learning about existing efforts, figuring out where are the gaps, and in particular talking to experts around the country about kind of what's needed. So how can we prepare research briefs or expert declarations that summarize existing evidence in ways that would be useful? How can we identify areas for future research and help to close some of the gaps in knowledge? And so they have made some great connections, and coming out of that have been involved in preparing expert declarations for a major kind of pending ongoing court case. So I think we're starting to have a growing impact. We had another letter that came out of our group. We had a volunteer step up to write it and create an open letter from concerned scholars regarding the Flores Settlement. So this is about opposing changes to the minimum standards of care and protections that are provided by the Flores Settlement Agreement. And so this was signed by over 1,200 academics. And one of the outcomes of this letter, after it was delivered to congressional leadership and again to executive branch officials, is that Senator Gary Peters of Michigan entered the letter into expert testimony for the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee hearing that happened last week, and discussed the letter in the hearing. So we are excited that it had that reach, and also just really excited that we recognized that this would be a useful thing. None of the four of us who had initially started this group thought we could write this letter with quick turnaround, and so we put it out to the staff group and had very quick response from a couple of people who offered to work on getting this letter turned around quickly. And so kind of future directions, where we're headed in this work, new members continue to trickle in, so we kind of see a future here. We are excited that we have recently received some funding from a foundation to hire some administrative support, since one of the kind of limitations of what we're able to do is just the limitations of our time. So a lot of this work, I should say, I was doing throughout the summer kind of on my own time, and not in my role as a member of the University of Wisconsin as a faculty member. And now that the semester is underway, I have limits on how much time I can put into this. And so we are excited to be able to hire somebody who's going to help with some of the coordination, so that will keep us going, I think, in a great way. We have a third research brief that's going to be published soon. This one is called Why Do People Migrate? Context of Migration from Central America and Mexico to the United States. Also, with increased visibility, we're receiving requests for research support. So there's another kind of lawsuit that is pending, this one to do with providing mental health services to children who experience separation from their parents. And we have the opportunity to provide some support for that case, providing kind of what we know from the research and supplying kind of evidence to that team. And additionally, I would add, as kind of a personal goal, this last bullet point is less so about the group efforts and more so about my thinking, is wanting to think about not only national but local engagement. So this work began with this national focus, and I'm glad for that to continue. But as I'm putting roots down back in Madison, and particularly in a week as intense as the one we've just had around here, also want to really build relationships and think about how I can support and work with others to partner with local organizations doing important work here in Madison and Wisconsin. And so I'm going to highlight a couple of last things. So one is, I just want to tell you about what I consider some of the gifts of doing this work. So first is that it's just been profoundly heartening in these times to have the opportunity to be doing something and not just being distressed by the news, to connect with inspiring individuals and organizations around the country who, many of whom have been doing this work for a very long time, others who, like me, have been kind of galvanized by recent events. Connecting to academics around the country who are with me and kind of feeling really motivated and excited to be able to support organizations working with migrant children and families, and to kind of use our research and our expertise to promote more just policies. And the other is an opportunity to use my expertise as a scholar and my research skills in ways that feel very meaningful. So some of the impacts, like having Senator Peters use that letter in testimony, feels like, that's what I dreamed about when I thought about being an academic, right? That I would do work that mattered. And so it's been great to do this. I think engaging publicly also sets up academic opportunities in ways that I didn't anticipate. And part of this was prompted, I checked my mailbox just before coming here, and this is the latest issue of the 0 to 3 journal is on the trauma of family separation and parental loss in early childhood. And after the op-ed came out, we were invited to contribute an article to this special issue, and that invitation would not have come about in another way. That was kind of what led to it. As well as getting invited to work with a group of scholars that are working on translating research on infant-toddler development into materials to support the well-being and care of young children who have been separated from or detained with their immigrant parents. So we've been working a group of scholars around the country on developing like kind of one-page handouts that kind of tell what children might be experiencing, how they might be showing you what they're experiencing, what you can do to be supportive, how you communicate around separation. And lastly, I just want to highlight some of the lessons I'm learning. I had my first kind of heading for this slide when I first wrote it was lessons learned, and then I thought that was inaccurate because I'm not done learning these lessons. So it's lessons I'm learning. So first is that it's just been kind of profound to me to feel like our help is so needed and wanted, that the outreach that I've done, which sometimes has included kind of cold calling organizations and just, working with this group, these are some, we'd love to be able to help fill in gaps if there are any that you could point us toward, have just had a really warm reception. And it really kind of highlights for me in our roles as researchers and scholars, just that there is kind of recognition and appreciation for the work that we do, and that provides kind of an entree. And I've had a lot of kind of access to have these conversations and get this, have these opportunities to connect and figure out how we can support their work. Another lesson that I am working on and was recently discussing with Larissa is thinking about also finding the balance between, feeling powerless to do anything and kind of wanting to be and help everywhere. So I don't want to be doing nothing, and I know that, and I also am figuring out how to manage kind of the outpouring of when we get these requests, and they tend to be with really kind of urgent timelines. How much can we do? Who can we bring in to work with us on these things? So sometimes it's not saying no, but it's also not doing it myself, and so kind of figuring that out. Which leads to the last point, which is just how incredibly gratifying and energizing it is to join with others, so advocacy organizations, fellow academics, to be making a difference. And so I will close there, and thank you for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions.